The rain hadn't let up for 3 days. I sat in my kitchen in Kelowna, the same kitchen where my wife and I had our coffee every morning for 31 years, and I looked at the envelope on the table. It had been sitting there since Tuesday. I already knew what was inside. I just wasn't ready to open it yet. My name is Robert Ashford. I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years building a civil engineering consultancy from a two-man operation out of a rented office on Bernard Avenue into one of the most trusted infrastructure firms in British Columbia. I did it with my hands, my reputation, and a stubbornness that my wife used to call my worst quality and my best one depending on the day. She passed 4 years ago. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in her life. After she died, I made a mistake. I got lonely. And when you're lonely and 60 and grieving, you stop thinking clearly. You start looking for pieces of the life you had. I sold 51% of the firm to my son-in-law. His name is Gavin Mercer. My daughter, Fiona, had married him 8 years before. A quick wedding in Whistler. Nothing like the big celebration my wife had always imagined for her. I'd had my reservations about Gavin from the start. He had the kind of confidence that doesn't come from actually doing things well. It comes from never having been told no. But Fiona loved him, or said she did, and she was my daughter, so I kept my mouth shut. When I brought him into the firm, I told myself it made sense. He had a business background. Corporate restructuring, he called it. Though I later found out his longest stint anywhere was 14 months before things went sideways. But I was tired and I needed a partner, and Fiona was there every Sunday for dinner, and having Gavin across the desk from me felt, in some hollow way, like keeping the family close. The first year was fine. He learned the systems, deferred to me on technical decisions, charmed the clients. He was very good at charming people. I'll give him that. The second year, things shifted. He started showing up to meetings I hadn't been invited to. Started having conversations with our 2 senior engineers that I only heard about afterward. Started talking about scaling, about modernizing the brand, about bringing in outside investors. I told him we were a boutique consultancy. Our value was our reputation, not our growth rate. He smiled and nodded and kept doing it anyway. By the 3rd year, he had quietly restructured the shareholder agreement. I didn't catch it at first. Why would I? I trusted him. He was my daughter's husband. He sat at my table at Christmas and asked for seconds. The restructure gave him effective operational control, as long as he held the majority stake. He'd bought another 2% from a junior partner I hadn't even known was looking to sell. 53%. Just enough. When I finally understood what had happened, I went to Fiona. I sat down in her living room in West Kelowna, the house I'd helped them buy, and I told her what Gavin had done. I showed her the documents. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, you signed those papers." I said I didn't understand what I was signing. She said, "Gavin had a lawyer explain everything to you." I said, "Fiona, your husband has taken my company." She said, "It's his company too. You gave it to him. And honestly, Dad, he's been carrying it. You've been coasting since Mom died." I drove home in silence. I remember the lights coming off the water on Okanagan Lake. I remember thinking that the grief had made me slow, and slow had made me stupid, and stupid had cost me everything I'd built. Within 6 months, I was out. Not fired, that would have been cleaner. Gavin was too careful for that. He created a new executive structure, appointed himself CEO, brought in an outside CFO, and made my role founder, senior technical advisor, purely ceremonial. I had an office. I had a title. I had no authority. I quit on a Wednesday in March, left my keycard on the desk, took the photograph of my wife that I kept on the windowsill and walked out. Fiona didn't call for 2 weeks. When she did, she said she understood why I was upset, but that I needed to understand Gavin had only done what was necessary to protect the business. She said I'd been struggling. She said maybe retirement was the right thing. I told her I loved her and I hung up. I didn't call a lawyer. That's the thing people never understand when I tell this story. They always ask, "Why didn't you fight it?" And the answer is complicated. Part of it was exhaustion. Part of it was that I genuinely wasn't sure I had a case. I had signed things, I had been present, and a courtroom battle would have been expensive and long and public in a way that would have dragged my firm's name through the mud. A firm that still had my name on the door, even if it was only decorative now. But the real reason, the one I've only admitted to myself in the last year, was Fiona. She had no idea how much she had helped Gavin do this. I don't believe she understood the mechanics of what he'd done. She just trusted her husband, the way I'd trusted him, and she'd filled in the gaps with a story that made sense to her. Her father was grieving, slipping, difficult. Her husband was capable, decisive, modern. One of them needed to be in charge. If I went to court, I would have to prove Gavin had deceived me. To prove that, I would have had to prove that Fiona had unknowingly helped him do it, that the dinners and the conversations and the Sunday visits had all been part of a slow, patient effort to make me comfortable enough to stop paying attention. I wasn't willing to do that to her. Not then. So I retired. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of the lake. I gardened. I read. I made friends with a retired nurse named Colleen who lived 2 doors down and sometimes brought me soup when the winters got gray. Fiona and I spoke on birthdays and at Christmas. Gavin stopped coming to Christmas after the first year. Fiona said he was busy. I said that was fine. The firm did well, by the way. Gavin was not a fool. He expanded aggressively, landed 2 major municipal contracts in the Lower Mainland, brought in 2 junior partners. My engineers stayed. I'd always paid them well and they had no reason to leave. The name on the door still read Ashford Consulting Group, though Gavin had quietly started referring to it as ACG in all the marketing materials. I watched from a distance. I kept my stake, my original 49%, and I received my quarterly distributions, which were considerable. Gavin couldn't touch that without buying me out, and I'd been careful enough, at least, not to let that provision get restructured away. So I wasn't poor. I wasn't even close to poor, but that was never the point. The point was that I had spent 35 years building something, and a man, who couldn't read a structural load report, had taken it from me while I was sitting in grief and calling it partnership. 2 years after I left, I found out through a mutual contact that Gavin had told people in the industry that I had stepped back voluntarily due to health concerns, that I had been showing signs of cognitive decline, that it had been a difficult situation for the family. I want to be honest about what I felt when I heard that. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder, something that settled in the chest and didn't move. I called my longtime solicitor, a woman named Harriet Voss, who had handled my firm's legal work for 2 decades and who had, notably, not been the lawyer Gavin used for the restructure. I told her what I'd heard. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Robert, I've been waiting for you to call me." She had been doing her own reading, it turned out. She'd had concerns about the restructure at the time, but I had told her not to get involved, and she had respected that. Now she laid out, very carefully, what she had found. The junior partner who had sold his 2% to Gavin, a young engineer named Finn Okafor, who had since left the firm to work in Calgary, had been approached by Gavin with an offer that included a signing bonus paid from a corporate account that had never been properly disclosed to the board, which meant, at the moment Gavin achieved majority control, he had done so using company funds without board authorization, which was, Harriet said quietly, a problem, not a small problem. A fiduciary problem, the kind that, depending on how you pursued it, could constitute fraud. I asked her what she needed. She said she needed time, documents, and for me to stop being so bloody reasonable. I laughed for the first time in a long while. The process took 14 months. I won't walk through all of it. The discovery, the depositions, the weeks where I wasn't sure it was going to work. The morning Harriet called me to say Gavin's own financial records had confirmed what we'd suspected. I'll just say that there were days I almost walked away again. Not because I doubted the case, but because every step of it moved through Fiona's life like something cold and unavoidable. She'd hired her own lawyer by then. She and Gavin were still together. She sat across from me in a boardroom in Vancouver and didn't look at me for 3 hours. The settlement was reached in October. I'm not able to disclose the specific terms. That's part of the agreement. But I can tell you that Gavin no longer holds a majority stake in Ashford Consulting Group. I can tell you that the corporate account irregularities were dealt with in a way that satisfied all relevant parties, which is lawyer language for Gavin paid back what he took. I can tell you that the name on the door remains Ashford, and that I was offered the option of resuming an executive role. I declined. I'm 63, not 40. I don't need to run anything. I just needed it to be true that I hadn't been wrong. The part I think about most isn't the settlement. It's the phone call I got from Fiona in November, about 3 weeks after everything was finalized. She called on a Sunday evening. I was in the kitchen making pasta, the old radio on the counter playing something from the CBC, Rain Against the Windows, because it's always raining in November. She asked if she could come over. She arrived an hour later. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table, the one with the ring mark from her mother's coffee cup that I've never had the heart to sand out. And she said, "I didn't know about the bonus payments." I told her I knew that. She said, "I knew he was pushing hard to get control of the firm. I knew he thought you were. I knew he thought it would be better if he was running things. But I didn't know he'd done it like that." I told her I believed her. She said, "Are you angry with me?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the way she'd looked at me across the boardroom. I thought about her mother, who had always said Fiona felt everything twice as hard as other people and just showed half as much. I said, "I was. For a long time. I'm not anymore." She was quiet. Then she said, "I told him, when I found out about the payments, that I wanted to take some time. Things aren't good between us right now." I didn't say anything to that. It wasn't my place. We ate the pasta together. She told me about a hiking trip she'd taken in September with some colleagues from work. I told her about the garden, about Colleen's soup, about a documentary series I'd been watching about the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway that I'd found oddly comforting. She laughed at that, said I'd always been obsessed with infrastructure. She left around 9. At the door, she hugged me, which she hadn't done in years. I went back to the kitchen and stood there for a while with the radio still on, and I thought about what it costs to be right. It costs something. That's what nobody tells you. You spend years wanting the truth to come out, and when it does, it doesn't feel the way you expected. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like the bill finally arriving. All those years of silence, of Sunday phone calls instead of Sunday dinners, of watching my grandchildren grow up in photographs Fiona posted online. All of that had a price tag, and the settlement didn't cover it. But here's what I've understood. In the year since all of this resolved, there is a difference between justice and happiness. I've been pursuing justice, and I have it now, more or less. I know what happened. Other people know what happened. The record is correct. Happiness is a different project. Happiness is pasta on a Sunday, and the radio and my daughter's voice getting a little warmer every time she calls, which is more often now. Happiness is Colleen bringing over a bottle of Okanagan Red and staying to watch 3 episodes of something ridiculous on Netflix. Happiness is knowing that when I eventually am not here, what I built will still have my name on it, not because I fought for it, but because it was always mine. I opened the envelope on Thursday, finally. It was from Harriet's office, a notice confirming the registration of the amended shareholder agreement with the provincial registry. Everything official now. Everything on paper. I put it in the filing cabinet in my study, in the folder labeled simply with the firm's name and the year it was founded. Then I went outside, because the rain had stopped, and the lake was doing that thing it does in the late afternoon, when the light comes through sideways, and the whole valley turns a color that doesn't have a proper name. I stood on the deck for a long time and just looked at it. My wife would have called it a good evening for doing nothing. She was usually right.